Welcome to Democratic Visions.
You know, Jeff, when I first started writing this book, I viewed it as a great historical opportunity.
We'll learn about historic author Douglas Wellman's new book, A Teenage Girl in Auschwitz. During the Second World War, 1.3 million mostly Jewish Europeans were deported from their homes to Auschwitz in southern Poland. German Nazis ran secret and horrific concentration and death camps in Central Europe. The Auschwitz-Birkenau cluster was the largest of them. This was the Holocaust. In just 4 years, 900,000 men, women, and children were gassed and cremated within hours of arriving by train. And 400,000 labored as slaves for the Nazi war machine. Most of these died of starvation, exhaustion, and disease. A Teenage Girl in Auschwitz is about one of those survivors. Douglas Wellman and I first met in the 1970s at Twin Cities Public Television. Doug went on to become a California-based television producer and director, a professor, chaplain, do-gooder, and author. He writes now from his home in St. George, Utah.
I've written 5 books in the last 9 years. I wrote one prior one on World War II called Surviving Hiroshima, a young woman's story. And a colleague of mine who knew I wrote books but hadn't read any of them, she read Surviving Hiroshima and she called me. And she said, I went to college with a woman whose grandmother was taken to the Auschwitz concentration camp when she was 14 years old. Would you like to meet the family? Whoa, would I? And so that's what started this off. And it was like a treasure trove of material that I wouldn't otherwise have gotten. The family provided me with what pictures were available because, of course, the family pictures were all destroyed by the Nazis. But they also had interviews done by Graz University and the University of Southern California Shoah Foundation. And they arranged for me to be able to get my hands on that material. And so I had the subject of the story is Basha Anus Freilich. The story of Basha's personal story is the story. It's the core of the book, but it also sets up a view into what the world was like for the Jews and other people during that horrible period.
That's one of the things I like about this book, and I liked about your book on the survivors in the Hiroshima blast. You provide a historical context that's incredibly important, particularly for these kinds of books. And I thank you for doing that.
Well, I had a bit of a battle over that, honestly, because the issue is you and I and people of our generation, we knew a lot about World War II, but I also taught at a university out here, and World War what, Auschwitz, what, nobody knew. So I knew in order to adequately tell Basha's story, I was going to have to provide some context so that readers would understand why this was happening, and that was a problem. I put that historical context in with Basha's story, and I ended up where I would have to stop her story and then fill in the historical part, and then 3 pages later you'd come back to Basha, and I said that's not working at all. So I put notes at the end of each chapter. And that is not what is traditionally done.
You've done a number of interviews on A Teenage Girl in Auschwitz, and one of them you mentioned that sure, it's about Auschwitz and the atrocities that happened there, but it's also more about the inner strength of a teenage girl and a promise she made. Maybe you can read a little bit from your book about that.
Sure. Basha, she's 14 years old. I really can't get past that. 14 years old, and she found the inner strength to get through 2 years at Auschwitz with people trying to kill her every time she turned around. Incredible inner strength. And just as an aside here, Jeff, I believe we all have that inner strength. We don't necessarily always find it, though. It may take a crisis to pull it out, but boy, boy, did she. And her mother was a very strong Zionist. They tried to get to the Middle East, but there were a lot of politics involved. When they were finally picked up to take them to Auschwitz, Basha's mother knew very well what was going to happen to them, to at least to her and the two youngest boys. And she told Basha, "Promise me you will live to tell this story." And as this all unfolded, I believe that promise was what allowed Basha not to give up. In those days and in that culture, if a parent told a child to do something, they did it. And I don't believe if Hava, Basha's mother, if she hadn't made her make that promise, Basha just might not have made it. I tell people I wrote this book, first of all, because it's an important part of the historical record. That was number one. Number two was that this is such a glowing example of the inner strength of the human being that we don't see displayed hardly ever. But it's there. And to think that this 14-year-old girl pulled from her family could tap that part of her is truly amazing. And you look at that, and I tell, actually one of my agent was telling people that you got to get young girls to read this book so they know just how much they're capable of doing if they only realize it and try. So that was so historical record, the emotional strength of human beings. And the third reason was history repeats itself. It happens over and over again. And I say that people who have insight into history have a unique perspective on what's going to happen in the world, and that's important too.
Doug, could you tell me about the town or small city they lived in Poland?
Basha and her family lived in a town called Prusani in eastern Poland. The town was probably about half Jewish and the rest Gentile. And the people all got along with one another. There was no, religious or racial animosity, although they tended to stay in their own, with their own people. And for her time and place, Basha had a perfectly normal life. They were, I guess you'd have to say they were poor, but a lot of people were poor. So, and the kids were happy, the parents were happy, and it was a happy childhood till World War II started, September 1st, 1939, I think. And the next thing they knew was that first the Germans attacked from the west, and then the Russians attacked from the east. And she woke up one morning to tanks rolling through the street. I keep saying 14 years old, but anybody awakened to tanks in the street is going to be a little bit disturbed. So she hung on to that. When the Germans, of course, double-crossed the Russians, and they attacked the Russians and pushed them out of Prusani, then things got substantially worse. The Russians weren't all that warm and fuzzy, but the Germans were evil. The Jews were put into a ghetto, and that happened to be where Basha's family was already living, so they didn't have to to move or anything. But there was a wall around it, and Basha was first introduced to a new concept, which was hunger. The Russians were using the communist system, and they brought in food. The only food that could be gotten was from the Russians, and the Russians provided sometimes very little, and there was no choice of what they might get. Basha's family was poor, but her father Isaac would do practically anything he had to do to feed his family. One of those things was kosher butchering. And that was illegal under the Russians, but he continued to do it. And as I say, the town was mixed, Jewish and Gentile. And Isaac had kosher meat customers out of both groups. And one of those people was a Gentile named Mrs. Markovich. So when Isaac did his butchering, Basha was assigned to take those meat parcels and deliver them to the Gentile customers. I guess the theory was she would be much more likely to get away with delivering the meat than he was. So one of the Gentile customers was the Markovich family, and Mrs. Markovich was incredibly kind to Basha. They were a wealthy family, and Basha would bring the meat, and Mrs. Markovich always had baked goods or cookies or something to give to Basha, and some more to take home to the other kids. She was very kind to Basha. Oh, and Mrs. Markovich would always make sure before she let Basha go back home that she was all bundled up, with her coat and everything pulled together properly so she wouldn't get cold. But then one day the Germans raided the ghetto and started to pack up people to send them to the prison camps. As the Nazis arrived at their house in the ghetto, Basha stepped out of the house with her grandfather. Her grandfather was an old man. He walked with a cane, and he was holding Basha's hand, hoping, I guess, to engender some kind of sympathy. The Nazis had no use for old men, so they shot him to death right on the doorstep.
At their home.
Right in their home, and right in front of the family. And then they had the sled ride. I should point out that as the sleds went through the town, the entire Gentile population turned out to watch the Jewish population being taken away and cheering for the demise of the Jews. So for Basha and everybody else, this was certainly demoralizing. As the sleds made its way through the city of Prusani, Basha looked out into the jeering crowd, and there stood Mrs. Markovich with the rest of her family, laughing, clapping, and carrying on with everyone else. Basha was crushed. I, as a child, knew something is very, very wrong with this world, and I felt no longer to live. So, who do you trust? Who do you trust when you're 14 years old? After this torturous, humiliating, freezing sleigh ride, they were taken to the railroad station and loaded onto animal boxcars called Güterwagons that had only one small window for ventilation. It had a screen over it. So if you were standing near the window, you froze. If you were in the middle, you suffocated. But in order to keep her spirits up, Basha's mother stepped in to try and be supportive. As they rode in the boxcars, Basha's mother, in an apparent attempt to cheer her up, told her to look outside. "My child, come stand on my shoulders and look out the little window and see what a beautiful world it is. It's worth living. In this world, it's a nice one." Basha rejected the idea, afraid that she would injure her mother. But her mother insisted, stood up and lifted her up high enough to see through the little window. As they passed through a town, Polish girls walked to the movie theater with German soldiers. Why are we different from them? Why are we different? She asked her mother. A Polish woman was walking with her child, and Basha shouted to her, begged her to throw her a snowball that they could use to eat for liquid. The woman looked at her, grabbed her child, and ran away. That, I don't know that this was hidden anti-Semitism or just general fear of the Germans for getting, too close to the Jews. But if you can imagine, well, clearly from Basha's words, she was totally demoralized and depressed, and obviously nobody else was very happy either. They lived in the town, and things were fine, and now they weren't fine. Not only the Germans, but their friends and neighbors had turned on them. It's a tough one. It was a 3-day journey, no food, no water, no toilet supplies. Some tried to escape by pushing the screen out in the car and jumping out the window. And that's when they discovered that there were SS troops on the roofs of all of these cars. And as they jumped off the train, they were all machine gunned to death. And Basha remembered as the train progressed, she could look out that window and see this trail of blood all the way across the countryside.
When they arrive at Auschwitz on the train, they got off, and it got worse.
It got worse. They got to Auschwitz at night, and when the SS guards opened the doors, it was like broad daylight. Light flooded the cars. They had a large embankment of large floodlights, and the SS guards came up and yelled at the Jews to get off the train immediately. And they had nightsticks and kicks and anything else they could use to get the people out of the cars and moving. Basha's youngest brother had been ill all the way on the train trip. He had a fever and he was just in bad shape. He jumped from the boxcar as ordered, and he fell down. He couldn't stand very well, but while he was down, he found an old dirty cup or something on the ground, and he filled it with snow. And as his mother got out of the car, he handed it to her, and he said, "Here, mother, take this. It will be a nice cool drink." And the SS guard walked up to him as he was doing this, pulled out his pistol and shot him in the head. So old people and young people, right off the bat, didn't fare well at all at Auschwitz. Now, Hava, Basha's mother, she knew very clearly what was going to happen. And that's when she told Basha that she had to live. And as she was going through that story, the guards separated them, took the mother, Hava, and the two youngest brothers, took them away. Basha quickly fled to see if she could find her father and her other brothers. And she got to them, but only for a few moments, and then the guard pushed them away. Another Jewish girl led Basha, and said, come on, we've got to get in this other line over here. And so they ran to the appointed place. And Basha was desperately looking for her mother, and she saw her. Her mother was quite tall. She saw her about to get into a truck, and she was with the two kids. She was having trouble getting on the step of the truck, and an SS guard came over, hit her with a riot baton. She fell, and that was Basha's last image of her. So,
how did Basha survive? I mean, we've already talked about her promise to her mother? Did she have friends she could count on in Auschwitz?
Push come to shove, I don't think there were any friends in there, because at some point it was going to be you or someone else, and people generally tried to defend themselves, to look out for themselves. Basha happened to be big for her age, and it appears to me, going through researching the records, it's a little bit confusing, but Basha was 14, but it appears that when the Nazis asked for her age, she told them she was 16. And because she was big, that was enough to squeak through and not be sent immediately to the gas chamber. And after that, it was just a question of figuring out what the right thing to do was at the right moment to stay alive. One of the things that Basha said was that when they were taken to their barracks, if a prisoner could survive for a few weeks without going crazy, then they had a chance of making it in the camp. But many of them simply lost their minds. They had a complete breakdown and were taken away at that point. So Basha had the inner strength to keep going, but she did have one friend actually toward the end of her stay there, a woman named Doris Golubowicz, who, as this all worked out in the end, became her sister-in-law. So when it was all over, so they were friends, but there wasn't much else. The girls, they were only given a piece of bread and a glass of water, but if they wanted to save the bread maybe for breakfast or to eat a little later, they'd put it under their pillows, and the other girls would steal it while they were asleep. I mean, they were just, they were starving and fearful, and they needed to do what they needed to do to survive.
Pasha was a survivor of Auschwitz. She made it to America.
This story actually has a happy ending. When the war was over, they were all sort of outcasts. They wandered all over Europe trying to, find friends, find family, find anything, find something to eat. But she met a man, Samuel Krilik, and he had a brother. And Basha and her friend Doris and Samuel and his brother became a foursome, and they fell in love, and they managed to emigrate to the United States. Basha was an incredibly ambitious person, and as we would assume by now, it took a lot to stop her. She and Samuel went into the retail shoe business, as did Doris and her husband. And Basha was incredibly successful. She and Samuel were incredibly successful, and they did very, very well for themselves. They had a vacation home in Atlantic City, and they really did live happily ever after. Not to say that there were issues and troubles and things, but they really became the American dream.
Douglas, thanks for being with us.
Jeff, I really have enjoyed this. I really have, which is kind of an unusual comment, given the subject matter.
Yeah.
But to be able to tell this story and to tell it to an old friend is just very special to me, and I thank you for that opportunity.
I'm glad we're reconnected.
Absolutely.
A Teenage Girl in Auschwitz is available on most online bookstores. Doug's website lives at douglaswellmanauthor.com. douglaswellmanauthor.com.
Democratic Visions is handcrafted by volunteers from Eden Prairie, Hopkins, Minnetonka, Edina, and Bloomington. Watch us on select cable systems and on our YouTube channel.